Welcome back to Morning Joe. That needs to happen right now on the set. Here with us now, former British Prime Minister and official envoy of the Middle East Quartet, Tony Blair. Great to have you on board. A lot to get to this hour. We want to bring you up to date on the developments overnight. And then jump in with our discussion with you. Just hours ago, the U.S. and 5 Arab allies launched their first airstrikes against Islamic State militants in Syria. This video, where large explosions can be seen from a distance, appears to show the aftermath of one of the first airstrikes. Officials say at least 50 airstrikes have hit Islamic State targets so far, many on ISIS's self-declared capital of Raqqa. At least 20 members of ISIS were killed. NBC News has learned the focus of the operation includes ISIS headquarters, command centers, training sites, and weapons facilities. ISIS is vowing to retaliate and blaming Saudi Arabia for allowing the attacks to occur. We can go on to report that Richard Engel, who has been covering this from the get-go, is referring to the criticism that President Obama gave ISIS time to prepare by announcing his strategy 2 weeks ago. In one tweet, Richard wrote, quote, "Told ISIS had time to move into civilian areas, hide weapons. Now they're on the move. Expect follow-up from all sides."
And there were several others. You know, there's only one commander-in-chief who has all the information.
Yeah.
Mr. Prime Minister, very easy to criticize Barack Obama for what he did or what he didn't do. Either way, you know better than anybody. Whichever way it breaks, the other side's going to be critical. What's the great challenge here? Because, you know, we used to look at the Cold War. Oh, it seemed so simple, us against them. And then even 2003 sort of seems quaint. We're just going after a guy that's running a country. Right now, it just seems like we're firing missiles into the desert. We don't know where we go, who we're going after here.
I actually think the president is right to assemble the broadest coalition and to go after these people. I think you've got to do that. Right. But I actually think it is a little like the Cold War, in the sense that you've got ISIS, you've got problems in Yemen, in Libya, Boko Haram in Nigeria, where they kidnap those young girls and where they're taking over towns in the whole of northern Nigeria. Yesterday, there were people in northwest province of Xinjiang in China, where their Muslim population is. It's the biggest security problem China has. The biggest problem we have in the UK, security terms now, France, Germany the same, are returning fighters from Syria. So I think we're going to have to get into a somewhat different rhythm in this and understand this is going to last beyond this president, this prime minister. It's going to last for a significant period of time, a generation.
When you say that, you're talking about a battle against Islamic extremists that want to wage war against, I was going to say Western civilization, against civilization itself.
Absolutely. And it's very interesting that they immediately criticize Saudi Arabia because they want to turn it back within the Arab world and say you guys are lining up with the Western and the infidel against Islam. What we've got to do is understand this is a battle of moderation and modernity versus extremism and reaction.
It also makes politics. It puts us in a position where we have to make some tough choices, doesn't it? And we have to start asking who wants to knock down buildings in London and Washington and New York and who doesn't. Assad does not. ISIS does. Assad is a terrible person, but at the same time, Assad running Syria is preferable to ISIS running Syria.
But here's the thing I think is really important. I think we've lost the significance of the Arab revolutions that started a few years ago. These regimes aren't going to stay in power. I mean, Assad has killed over 200,000 of his people. There are more refugees displaced from Syria than since the Second World War.
Right.
Possibly including the Second World War. So, you know, these old regimes are not going to stay in power. The issue is, when you get rid of the old regime, that's when the next battle begins. And then it's a fight between what I would call the open-minded people who want to be connected to the world, who share a lot of the thoughts that we share, and these radical Islamists who want to create a society which, frankly, is not compatible with the modern world.
No, it's not. And to your point exactly, it's not just about stamping out ISIS, Willie. It's about trying to eradicate an ideology that could destroy the world if unleashed and gotten out of control, which is why collective action and the president working with other countries and engaging them in a real way almost seems like the only way to go.
We've seen how difficult over the last decade and a half it is to stamp out a radical ideology. It's a very complicated thing to do, but I think you're right that
it's not just bombs.
It's a critical coalition he put together. You said recently, Mr. Prime Minister, unless you're prepared to fight these people on the ground, talking about ISIS, you may contain them, but you won't defeat them. You're certainly not alone in that analysis. So where does that leave us this morning? You could turn their headquarters into dust, but what happens next?
Right, and that's why I think your administration's sensible in making sure that we're also helping the Syrian opposition that actually can do some of this fighting on the ground. I know General Allen, who's the person the president's put in charge of this operation. He's a super smart and good man. And I think, over time, because you're building a coalition, you're addressing what, frankly, was a weakness of strategy post 9/11, post 2003. You're actually creating a broad coalition because a lot of these Arab countries and a lot of the countries in the Middle East, they now know this is their fight,
right,
and they've got to be there. But, the other thing that we've got to do is, since this is a problem in the Far East as well as in the Middle East, in Africa as well as, in Sub-Saharan Africa as well as the North Africa, we've got to deal with the education systems around the world which are teaching literally millions of young people a view of the world that is based on religious prejudice and not open-mindedness. And unless we also have a long-term plan to root out those education systems, these kids who are taught in madrasas, a form of religious instruction, and you're preparing the next generation, you're incubating this problem in some of these education systems. And, if you take a country like Pakistan, that's not been in the news these last weeks. You've had 1 million people displaced just in these last weeks as the Pakistani army is battling these militants in the hill country of Pakistan.
So President Obama is speaking tomorrow before the UN General Assembly. What do you think the challenges are from your point of view in terms of how he addresses the world on this?
I think he's got a great opportunity to unite the world. And in a way, he particularly, I think, is able to come and say, look, I'm not someone who started wanting to get into this situation, but here is the threat. It's a threat that concerns all of us. It's not about Christians versus Muslims. It's not about the West versus Islam. It's about everybody who believes in a world in which people try and live with each other across the boundaries of culture and faith, and those people who want to use faith as a source of division and conflict. And I think he's got a chance to rally the world to that essential battle. And, it is going to take time. It's going to take a long time. I'd watch Libya, by the way. I think Libya is a potentially the next flashpoint, because I think you'll find a lot of these people coming from ISIS into Libya as well. And, there again, there are people that we can work with there. We've got to work with them and try and help them. But it's a long, hard battle. You take Kenya as a country, making real progress over the last years. Now its progress is in jeopardy as a result of this extremism coming and killing people in the country.
What country in the Middle East is not under threat from ISIS? You look at Jordan, you look at Saudi Arabia. I suppose the generals have retained some control in Egypt, but the entire region is in a state of turmoil. Would you be shocked if any country fell over the next 6 months in the Middle East?
In a way, apart from those that are already in difficulty, I would, because the other thing that's happening, which is, if you like, the good news. I mean,
we would like some good news. Thank you very much.
If you look for some good news,
yes.
What is happening is that, and I'm seeing this because I'm out in the Middle East about twice a month, and you're seeing now for the first time people stepping up and stepping forward and saying, this is wrong, we've got to fight it, it's our problem, we're going to deal with it. And if you're in a country like Jordan, where the king's actually done a great job in trying to shepherd his country through these last years, I mean, you're looking at the rest of the region and saying, well, we don't want that here. So in a way, you're also building support for the alternative and progressive vision for the future, and I think that is the good news in the region.
Let's move on to the Middle East peace process. Is your head sore from banging it against the wall yet?
You spent a lot of time
People
there.
have been doing that for hundreds and hundreds for a very long time.
It's still important. It's important partly because of this other issue, by the way.
Right.
Because if you could get two peoples, Jewish state of Israel, predominantly Muslim state of Palestine, if you could get two peoples living together in the Middle East, it's quite a good signal for the rest of the region.
Right now, what is the greatest challenge? Is it Netanyahu, who's afraid to cross his base? Is it Hamas still exerting too much influence over the Palestinian Authority? What's the biggest challenge now?
The biggest challenge is to prove that on the ground you can deal with the security problem of the Israelis and the occupation problem of the Palestinians. In other words, I think you could, if everything in the ground was going well, I don't think it would be hard to put people in a room and work out where the borders go. It's what's happening on the ground, as you just seen from Gaza, where you have this ghastly conflict. And Gaza, by the way, it's a strip of land, 2 million people in it, average age 19, quarter of the population under the age of 5. Some of the kids who are 12 years old have been through 3 wars now.
My God.
So, but rockets coming out of Gaza, then retaliation by Israel, and then so how you deal with these issues on the ground, I think, is the toughest job.
Before the latest round of fighting in Gaza in July, Hamas was seen as being on the run, weakened. So weakened they had to go to the Palestinian Authority and basically sue for peace. Did the attacks in July strengthen Hamas?
Short term, yes, because they appear to be standing up to the Israelis. But if you think of the sacrifice, but of the people in Gaza for that. However, one good thing also out of all of this has been the role of Egypt in actually supporting the peace process, and now their role, I think, will be very critical in moving the situation forward in Gaza.
As we bounce around the world, if I may ask you about the Scottish independence vote that took place last week.
What happened there? We were sure the
from?
Scots would break free of their bonds.
Surprised at all by the outcome of the vote?
Not surprised, but deeply relieved.
Why do you say that?
The United Kingdom to break up. I mean, come on.
What would have been the consequences?
The consequences would have been very bad for the UK, very bad for Europe, not great for the world. So I'm
How did it come to the point where you are now deeply relieved that Scotland? I mean, how did it seem to sort of percolate out of nowhere almost?
Well,
the story.
I think people underestimated the
I think we might have
the strength of feeling. But anyway, it's done, and it's,
We're good.
So what
good.
should British leaders, especially from London, learn from this? This was a close call. They went up, made a lot of promises. Some of the banks made threats, but what did London learn about how maybe they need to draw Scotland in a bit more?
Yeah, I think it is important to do that. I think the other thing is, as globalization changes the world so fast, people search for points of identity. They feel that they're powerless in the face of great forces that change their lives. And I think in a sense that type of independence movement, which you see also in Spain and elsewhere in Europe, it's not either unnatural or inexplicable.
Before we close, obviously ISIS is the central focus of the headlines today, especially with the UN General Assembly in New York. There's been a lot of criticism for President Obama's foreign policy here at home in Washington, where there's a lot of rancor. I'm just wondering what the point of view is from across the pond in terms of how he's handling this, because we are seeing a convergence here, some sort of support, really, for our president.
Yeah, and I think that's the right thing. And I think he is in a really good position, as I say, to unite the world. And I think most people think, and I'm someone who went through all the post-9/11 decisions, so I know how tough it is, but I think he's doing the right thing. He's building the coalition, and you're not going to beat this thing. I think this is what we've learned over the years, unless this is not just about America and a few of its key allies, but it's got to be a broader coalition that crosses those boundaries of faith and culture, so that you do, if you like, get a coalition of modernity against the coalition of extremism.
All right.
Before we go, I've got to ask you the important questions. Are you following the Premier League this year?
Of course.
Ugly.
It's
ugly.
not good. It's not a good subject for me.
Your club,
Mr. Prime
Newcastle,
Minister.
very ugly right now. My club, Liverpool, very ugly. Man,
Looks
you very
heartbroken.
ugly. It is a bizarre start to this campaign, isn't it?
But it shows you what a great league it is. It's the best league in the world, for sure.
Will your manager survive?
I think he probably will, at least short term. But I mean, what do I know? I don't know. I mean, of all the jobs. No,
say it with
sometimes when I see other leaders, I realize how difficult it is. But I think the only thing that's potentially more difficult than being a leader of a country is being leader of a football club.
Especially Newcastle.
Well, I wasn't going to say especially Newcastle.
They're a tough crew.
We're just starting slowly, but we're getting into gear later in the season.
All right, Mr. Prime Minister.
Prime
thank
Minister
you for coming.
Tony Blair, thank you so much. It's always great to see you.
Thank you.
Still ahead on Morning Joe, Rear Admiral John Kirby joins us live from the Pentagon in just a few minutes, and later we'll speak to former Israeli President Shimon Peres. Up next, did you upgrade your smartphone to an iPhone 6 or a 6 Plus? Did you, Mr. Blair?
No, I'm still on the BlackBerry.
Your BlackBerry.
I love it.
Hanging in there.
I'm with the Samsung.
I'm loyal.
Awesome. You're
when he goes home, he
loyal.
puts it down and he
I
plays
think it's-
Pong.
Pac-Man. Okay. The sales numbers are in, and it looks like Apple has hit another record on its stands. And then, standing by your man, the so-called kissing congressman, gets help from his wife in his bid for re-election. We'll show you the new ad next on Morning Joe.